All right, let me get some feedback on what you thought of the story. Did you like it? Did you enjoy reading it? Sorry, what you thought, Bridget?
I mean, I like it. I thought it was like really interesting. It's kind of one of those stories that makes more sense before they get into it. It's kind of in the beginning, you're kind of but I feel like there's a lot of stuff that needs to be analyzed.
Okay, yeah, so it kind of is like, it, at the very beginning, we get this feeling that nothing is really what it seems, because it's got this kind of, what we would say is over-determined. We would say every single word in the thing seems like you could analyze it and you could find some sort of symbolic meaning to it, right? And so it doesn't make a whole lot of like realistic sense in the beginning, but as it goes on, you start to realize that the story has what's called internal consistency, which means that even if there are things in it that seem fantastical and like ridiculous or absurd, the story itself accepts those things as true, and within the story world it makes sense for them, so that as you read it, it kind of makes a little bit more sense as you go. Jack?
Yeah, like I read it the whole time thinking like there's some big moral to the story, and I thought it was like, oh, they're not actually human. And I spent the whole time reading the first time like, this is so confusing. And then
Right.
at the end, I'm like, wait, there's no more. Like if there is one, I couldn't find it. Like it was just completely confusing.
Yeah, so at the very end of the story, they don't like recognize that the way they treated the man with the wings was wrong. They don't have any sort of like judgment placed upon them, like they don't get in trouble for it. We don't find out who this man with enormous wings was. Was it actually an angel, or was it, we don't have any idea. So the open-ending nature of the ending, kind of like, or open-ended nature of the ending, makes us question whether we understood the story at all. And I think that's where we get this idea of like, we got to analyze this story to find out what kind of meaning it could have for us at all. Yeah, Ashton.
I thought the story was sort of weird. I didn't.
Oh, okay.
From what it was a pretty weird.
Yeah, we would call this genre, it's called magical realism. So that a lot of it just feels realistic. A lot of the descriptions of things as kind of dirty and covered in parasites and chicken coops and all of that stuff, it's all related to what the real world looks like. And the detail is focused on the realism of the story. And yet there are these magical elements that we are just supposed to accept as real within this realistic world. Most fantasy most magical worlds and stories are broken up. They have some stories that are realistic and some stories that are fully fantasy, and they will introduce you to the fantastical world and how magic works and all of that stuff. But this story combines the two of them, and that's more unusual. Okay, Zach, Kale, and then Keegan.
And in the first paragraph, we just get all this like immense realism. Just as soon as you start the story, like their kid is dying, it's a sad day, it's dark, it's raining, they're having to kill crabs, and then just immediately so realism. So as soon as you start getting this angel that comes to them, the entire time you're searching for an explanation. Well, from that first paragraph, I know this is a very realist story. It's dark, it's deep, it's gritty. It feels so like it's just so real. And the entire time you're waiting for what is it really? How is he really? How is this explained? Again, I have to explain. I gotta explain. And
Yeah. Yeah. So does that feel you're leaving like unsatisfied, or what is the feeling there?
It's just at first it's just like confusion. I think the story's not at all what you thought it was.
Yeah.
It necessitates a second look at the story.
Okay, good. So it's like, if I'm expecting the whole time for them to explain this, then I'm reading through one set of eyes. And once I know that they're not going to explain it, it takes this whole different set of eyes to actually understand it. Got it. Kel?
I think the whole purpose of the story is not to teach you like a lesson, but to rather show human cruelty. Because the whole time the angel hasn't really done anything. And the people who found him have just been letting him live in chicken coop and have been profiting on his weakness.
Yeah, right. And yet they're even though they're profiting off of him, they're not going to treat him like he is worth anything to them. It's a story about exploitation, though.
In the end, when she was talking about getting the onions, I think that's to cover up the fact that I think she felt guilty and was almost glad that he had gone, because that entire time she probably suspected that he had been so prosperous, and to see him go is probably like a relief, but not feeling guilty.
Yeah, and she calls it an annoyance in her life, right? He was no longer an annoyance in her life. Maybe he was annoying because he's reminding her that she can treat other beings this way. So now that he's gone, I don't have to think about my own cruelty and I can just move on with my life. So there is a kind of lesson then in the story. It's not a lesson that says like you should behave a certain way, but it's a lesson maybe about what human beings are actually like, the truth of human nature. Keegan?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was gonna say. Like, definitely see the magical realism in the story, because the story, even though it's like kind of fantasy, it really is real, because I don't know how to explain it. Like, they treat this like angel so bad, and then they kind of pull it back, like, oh, this angel isn't real. But then like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like very real, like the message they're trying to send.
Yes.
But then they like try to pull it back with like adding some fantasy and stuff like that.
Yes, so maybe it kind of softens. I think you can see it two ways. Like adding the fantastical element maybe softens the blow. So if this was a story and this wasn't an old man with wings, but just an old man they found in the mud, then it would be that kind of gritty, tragic story that we heard at the beginning. But because they introduced this element of the angel, maybe we're kind of saved a little bit from the reality of what human beings are like. On the other hand, because this is something that is so usually associated with something spiritual and special and amazing, maybe it makes it more gritty to throw the magical into this world that is so grotesque in a lot of ways. Go on, yeah.
Yeah, and I forgot what I was gonna say.
I'll come back to you, Bridger, and then to Ash.
I was just gonna say, it's such like a weird story. It's like I'm looking for like the moral of the story kind of.
Yeah.
And it seems like one of those like just classic like golden rule type stories, you know?
Yeah.
Like treat others the way you want to treat them. And so I was expecting on like the end something like horrible would happen. I sleep and then and like flies away. So I'm kind of just left with, like, well, wait, what's like the point?
And they profited off of their mistreatment of him.
Yeah.
Like they end up in a nicer house because of
Yeah,
that.
it kind of maybe just goes to show that like maybe almost like the moral of the story is just like how unfair everything about life is. Just, like,
Yeah.
This like amazing person might get like perfect grades and then totally like be homeless growing up, and then this one person like flunked out of high school might come to the genius dimension.
Yeah, and maybe then the moral of the story is kind of a little bit like there is no moral to the story.
Yeah.
It's random. Good luck out there. Yeah, maybe. Ash, yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's not human, so it's okay.
Okay, yeah, so to go back to Keegan's point too about the mixture between the magical and the realistic, because they see him as not of their world, they kind of gives them license then to mistreat him, rather than to hold him up on a pedestal. Yeah, Keegan.
And this story, it definitely points out the nature of humans, I guess, because everyone stares at people or things that are like different. And
Mhm.
this definitely exaggerates it, and yeah, like I said, makes it more like magical, I guess.
What do you mean by that last part?
Like this story takes it to a whole other level, like because everyone stares and stuff, but this story kind of just like I said, like exaggerates it, like, oh, they're putting this guy in a cage, like,
Yeah.
everyone's pointing at him and like stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, so if this man had just been maybe like they bring up circuses, so like some kind of like circus freak, that kind of idea of like maybe somebody being a conjoined twin in the 30s and even up until the 80s, we would then put them in traveling shows and look at them and pay to look at them and laugh at them or ridicule them or something. That still has its foot in realism, and here that's exaggerated by saying, what if it was an otherworldly being? We treat them the same way. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go to Ashton, Peyton, and then Bridger. Okay.
I was gonna say, it's sort of like with the tarantula lady,
Mhm.
she's also like. They said that,
Uh-huh.
like to relate this to the real world, it's like, not only like, do we some, like, humans like mistreat, like to take advantage of like, unique creatures, but we can also do that, with just like, people with unique personalities that are like maybe nice and like always there to help.
Mhm.
We like would sometimes take advantage of those people.
Yeah, what's so interesting about this story too, we haven't talked about the narration yet, is that we don't know if he's a nice person, really. We don't know anything about this old man with the wings. We have no insight into his head. We have no idea if his intentions are maybe malicious. Like maybe he came to Earth to wreak punishment on this couple, and he was just too old to be able to do it. We don't know. We do, but it's like the people who interact with him don't care what's going on inside that head. We can treat him however we feel is the way we want to treat him, and we don't really have to pay attention to his thoughts and feelings. I said Peyton and Bridger, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Peyton.
I remember what Keegan said, when it said like a tale for children, I feel like they exaggerated the abuse while giving like a fake victim,
Mm-hmm.
because it's for children, to like show kids what not could happen, but like
It's like that. It has a fairy tale aspect to it, where there are truths about human nature coming through, and a lot of fairy tales are really dark. Like, and not just, I mean, like Disneyfied fairy tales are still really dark when you think about them. Like when you think about what happens to the Little Mermaid, like it's depressing and kind of gross. And so those kind of exaggerations, though, are what then like lead us to learn something valuable about human nature, I guess. Yeah. Bridger?
I was just gonna say, the story, like the entire thing, it's almost like counterintuitive.
Mm.
It's almost like it's leading you into like this claim, like that, oh, they're gonna get totally punished, and at the very end, it's just like, oh, never mind.
Yeah. Which it maybe goes back to this idea of a fairy tale too. It sets us up for it to be a story for children and a fairy tale, which always has a clear moral ending. And this one just doesn't.
It's almost like his movie just died in the middle of writing it.
Yeah, right.
He's like writing, like coming up to the climax, and this movie just died.
And then he's just like, oh, well, print it. Okay, so I want the narration sheets that you wrote on. I'll give you points for those. Pass those forward for me. And then these stories, we're gonna talk about this for next class. So this is what we're focusing on. Next time, we're gonna get into analyzing these stories a little bit more carefully. So bring it back with you with all your notes.